Welcome to Birdland Media Works. I'm your host, Danielle Palli, and today I'm joined by Elizabth Brosha. Elizabeth is a certified clinical musician, artist, and elementary school teacher who also provides private harp lessons and art classes to students of all ages. She has more than a decade of teaching experience and, when outside the classroom, spends much of her time playing therapeutic music to patients in a clinical setting in order to help them relax, thereby facilitating healing within their own bodies. Elizabeth, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Danielle. It's nice to be here with you.
So, our topic today is the healing power of music. Elizabeth, can you begin by telling our listeners a little more about yourself and your work?
Well, thank you, Danielle. I have been a teacher for 13 years. I have worked in an elementary school teaching kindergarten and first grade. And as I was teaching for many years, I noticed over the years that music had a great influence in my classroom, and I always wanted to use music in a way to help the students that I had, but I wasn't quite sure how to do it. And that's when I found out about the clinical musicianship program. And as I began to research about it, I knew that it was something that I wanted to pursue, but it took me a couple of years to get it started, but I finally have finished it and received my certification about 6 months ago, and I'm very happy, and I'm happy to include it in the classroom and also in other areas of my life.
Congratulations. That sounds like such a fascinating field to get into, and so you're providing something that is such a service to other people. So what drew you to become a certified clinical musician? And can you tell us a little bit about the training that's involved?
Okay, well, I've been playing the harp for a long time, and I've always liked music. But as I would play the harp, I found out about a lot of people that were involved in playing harp for healing and helping people in a clinical or hospital setting. And I always wanted to find out more, and I did some research online. And as I was teaching, I thought that the harp might be able to help some of the students that I worked with, because even though I'm a classroom teacher, I still work with students that have autism or behavior management problems. I've had over the years several students with special needs, children that are in wheelchairs, and sometimes it's very hard for these kids to integrate into the main classroom, and I knew that music would somehow be able to help them. So I found out more information about the clinical musician program, and I thought that I could somehow integrate this into a classroom setting. The training that I had mostly was like a certification on your own. I did most of the work online with a mentor. And I also had to do a lot of recording, and I would send the recordings to the mentor, and then I would receive feedback from her through the internet and also through Skype. And then I did a 4-month internship at an actual rehab facility, actually 2 rehab facilities. And that was a very, very good experience for me to be playing live with people and interacting with several patients whom some of them were not able to get out of bed. Some of them had dementia or Alzheimer's. Some of them were young. Some of them were old. And it just kind of opened a new world for me, because I didn't realize the many different needs that people have in rehab. And it was really amazing to be able to be a part of it with my harp. So it was a very good experience.
And I find it fascinating, too, how much more we can access via technology, because you're in New Mexico and not in, say, you're in kind of a more remote area. So to be able to do most of this online and find a mentor, it gives you the opportunity to do something that you couldn't have done otherwise, at least not easily. So that's really fascinating. Now, I'm going to put you on the spot about your students. I know you love them all dearly, but can you talk a little more about their behavior prior to you beginning to play music for them versus what you've seen since then?
Sure. I'm a main classroom teacher, and every year I have usually about 17 to 25 students, depending on how many children are at the school. So the largest classroom I've had was 25, and I guess the least amount of students. One year I had 15 in the beginning, which gradually became more. I think at the end of the year I had about 22. So I am a regular education teacher, but that means that I have all kinds of children with special needs that are integrated into my classroom. And sometimes, days will go by where there's no episodes, but sometimes children with special needs they don't really know how to express themselves in a teaching or classroom environment. That's why they're there. They are there to learn, and they are children. And I had very young children, 6 years old, 7 years old, and they are learning how to express themselves. Sometimes they don't have the best social cues, or they don't understand social cues. Sometimes they have anger outbursts, or children with autism don't know how to communicate. So what I found was that when I started playing music during the classroom at certain times during the day, there was a peace that happened in class, and I don't really know how to explain it to people that don't work in a classroom. But usually, a classroom is very busy. There's a lot of talking going on and things, and it's hard sometimes for the teacher to get everybody's attention and get everyone functioning and focusing at one time. What I noticed was when I started playing the music, the kids basically calmed down, and there was a peace, and I could give directions, and the children would listen more. There would be less outbursts, and we would get more work done. I also noticed if we were having like an art time or a free time, if I would play music, the kids would come up with more creative solutions to problems that I would give them to solve, or projects that we were working on. I noticed that they had more creativity when I would play music. It was really very amazing, and I knew that I was onto something. So that's actually when I began the clinical musicianship program, because I just knew that I had to keep going with this, because I knew that it would be helpful not only for them, but for me as well, being the teacher. So it just was really very eye-opening in a very good way.
And how fascinating. And there's so much research that supports what you're saying about listening to music or playing music, helping with creativity, because it just lights up those centers of the brain that are responsible for imagination. Now, just to set the stage, do you actually drag a really big harp with you into the classroom, or do you pre-record and bring it and play it on something?
At this point, I was playing pre-recorded music in the classroom. We started off listening to CDs by a harpist based in California. Her name was Lisa Lynn, and she has several CDs available for relaxation and pain management. And I started playing her CDs in the classroom when we actually would be learning handwriting. And what I noticed right away was I would demonstrate how to create the letters, and I would put her music on, and the kids would work in their handwriting books. It was quiet for at least about 20 to 25 minutes, which was unheard of in a classroom. It was really amazing. So her harp CDs were very helpful. I also played some Mozart piano concertos. I played some of Pachelbel's music, particularly the Canon in D, and that worked very well also. So they were all big hits in our class.
And Pachelbel's Canon is one of my favorites, and that also has been linked to relaxation. So that's very interesting that you're validating the research that's out there that explains the power of music. Now,
it's also good for dogs with fireworks. This past year, we had lots of fireworks over the 4th of July, and I put on the Pachelbel for my dogs, and they were able to calm down.
I'm going to try that, because our dog Simone is 1 year old, and when she was a puppy, she slept right through it. But this year in our new location, she was terrified. And I felt so bad. She was clinging to me like Velcro for the entire night. So next year I'm going to try playing music and kind of helping her adjust to it a little bit better. So thank you for that tip. Now, a little bit earlier in this interview, you'd mentioned that a whole new world opened up for you in clinical care. You touched on it a little bit, but can you talk a bit more about music in the clinical setting as it differs from the student teaching setting?
Yes, what I have seen in my internship was really quite amazing. I was a little bit, I have to admit, I was a little bit frightened when I had to do a 4-month internship. It was 45 hours of actual playing time with patients in a clinical setting. And I worked in 2 rehabilitation centers near my home. And just a new world opened up to me because I was able to work one-on-one with patients that had many different scenarios. I worked with some amputee patients that had come back from Afghanistan. I worked with some recovering ladies that had fallen and shattered their knee, so they were stuck in a hospital bed with their whole leg up in the air, and they were just so appreciative of having someone come in and play music for them. And I guess I never really thought about it before. I had visited old folks in homes, including my own grandmother and an aunt. But this kind of opened up a different world for me in seeing people that were really truly in pain and had many different ailments. And I had never seen that kind of thing before. So it really opened up my mind to the suffering of people. And I think it caused me to be a lot more compassionate of people and their pain. And it helped me through some of my own pain of things that I've had, of illnesses, and I was able to know about these other people, and it really gave me a chance to have my eyes opened in a very nice way.
You know, it just now reminded me of a time a friend of mine was in the hospital and his wife was there, and I came in with music and just started playing like this upbeat music, and we started dancing and singing. And years later, I forgot all about it, and he still brings it up, because when people are in that vulnerable state, to have somebody do that for them, you know, you might forget about it after you leave, but they're going to remember that for years to come. So that's really amazing. And just to clarify, in this case, you're actually bringing the harp into them, correct?
Yes, I brought in a small harp that had 22 strings, and it had legs on it. And I was very fortunate because the first time I went into the hospital, I was lugging this harp around from room to room, and it was so tiring. So my husband, who is an engineer, he fashioned a cart for me out of a luggage cart, and I was able to set the harp inside this little cart and also fit a music stand in there and my music, and was able to put the harp in a cart, and I just would take the cart and I would wheel it from room to room and knock on the door and say, hey, you want to hear some music today? And I would talk to people for a little bit, and some people were interested and others were not, but it was just a really very nice, eye-opening experience.
Were there days where you're like, why didn't I just take up the flute? It would have been easier.
Yes, exactly. Or the piccolo.
Right. So is music healing?
Yes, it's a very good question. And as I was thinking about that, I had to think on it for a while. It does seem as if our brains are actually wired for music. The brain actually responds to music almost as if it were medicine. But music does not really give you a cure. Music is more of the antidote to making the healing happen. For instance, if I go into a rehab center and someone is getting chemo, if I go in and play the harp for an hour, their cancer isn't going to be cured. What I'm doing is I'm helping to facilitate the healing that's going on in their body. And what the music can do is help people to manage pain. It can improve their mood. It reduces a need for sedatives, and it can lower blood pressure, and all of those things together, in my mind anyway, is very healing. But the music itself is not a cure. It's not going to take the pain completely away, but it will help in many ways with other things like medication to make your healing begin.
Yeah, well, I've read studies where people live 7.5 years longer just by having a positive attitude. So if you're playing that music and you're lifting their spirits, that's going a long way to helping boost their immune system just because of their attitude change. So I absolutely believe what you're saying. And research repeatedly validates the tremendous power of music to include improved memory and overall cognitive function. We also know that listening to music releases dopamine, and that's the feel-good chemical that affects our emotions and perceptions. And according to one study from Stanford University, music helps those with insomnia and depression.
I've seen a lot of amazing things, particularly when I was placed in a memory ward. And as we were speaking before, it opened up a whole new world for me because I had never visited someone who was an Alzheimer's patient. And going in there was actually a little frightening for me because I would wheel the harp in, and as I was wheeling the harp in, the doors would close and lock behind me. And that's so people don't wander away, but they would put me in a common room, and I would start playing for some patients, and they would just be sitting in a wheelchair with their head down. And if I would start playing something like I've been working on the railroad or Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, their head would pop up and they would look at me and all of a sudden just start singing. And it was amazing because it was almost like they were totally not listening, totally not paying attention, didn't even know I was there 5 minutes before. But when the music would start, it would trigger something in their mind and they would start singing. And we would play songs together and they would sing. But unfortunately, sometimes when the music would stop, when I would stop playing, their head would go back down again, their eyes would glaze over. But for that short, maybe 10 minutes of time, it was like they were very cognitive. They were very alive and listening, and I think that is just amazing. I'm still surprised that I've been able to do this kind of work. It's quite wonderful.
And that is amazing. And I've heard of a number of cases like that, and it's a documentary that was released. I believe it's called Alive Inside, but it talks about what you just mentioned, where people seemed unreachable and they started playing their favorite song from when they were in their 20s and 30s, and people would start singing and dancing, and the memories would come back the more they did it. So the more that you're there, I believe, the more that you're helping restore their memory. So not everyone has access to their own personal clinical musician, but most people have music available to them. What recommendation would you make to somebody who maybe feels anxious or is under a great deal of stress?
Well, first of all, I would just suggest that you start out with music that is very important to you, and you play that music. If you're interested in helping yourself to sleep, and as you did say, reduce your anxiety, you might want to look for music that has a slower beat to it. And what I've found doing this is that the music that is played more slowly, a slow resting heartbeat, like maybe 60 beats per minute, that music is the most healing. So you want to look for things that are played a little bit more slowly. Handel's water music works very well. We mentioned before the Pachelbel canon. A lot of things by Mozart are very slow. There's really a lot of relaxation music out there. You might even want to think about nature sounds. I was just teaching today in an art camp, and we were doing projects about the sea and ocean creatures, and I played ocean surf music, just waves crashing. And it was just amazing how those kids just calmed down and settled down just by hearing the slow crashing waves coming in. It was really helpful to me as the teacher to get those kids to calm down. And it was just sounds of nature. Bird calls are very relaxing. Also, something that works with me is Native American flute. That is very calming and relaxing. So those things are very helpful in releasing anxiety.
Now, you're a very talented lady because you not only provide music services such as that we've been talking about, and you're a teacher and you're an artist. So how can people learn more about you and the services that you provide?
Well, right now I'm mainly on Facebook. I'm having a website created now as we speak, but I am on Facebook, and maybe we could put a tag through your podcast of how people could reach me through email.
We'll definitely get the tag on Facebook and have email available in the description of this podcast so that people can find you and keep up with your work. Well, Elizabeth Brosha, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was wonderful to be here.